The House of Windsor. For centuries, it has stood as a monument to tradition, a bastion of composure, a carefully constructed illusion of unwavering strength. But behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, behind the practiced smiles and perfectly tailored suits, lies a truth far more complex, a truth that, in the autumn of this year, threatened to shatter the monarchy's carefully crafted facade. The story begins, innocently enough, with Prince Louis, the youngest child of William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales, a boy known for his mischievous grin, his playful waves from the palace balcony, the very embodiment of youthful exuberance. But somewhere along the way, the light in Louis's eyes began to dim. The laughter faded, the playful waves ceased, and those closest to him knew that something was profoundly wrong. The signs, in retrospect, were there for anyone to see. A quiet withdrawal from his boisterous siblings, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, a reluctance to participate in the games that once brought him such joy, a shadow of sadness that seemed to cling to him like a persistent fog. But in the whirlwind of royal life, where duty calls and appearances matter above all else, those subtle cries for help were tragically overlooked. William and Catherine, caught in the relentless demands of their public roles, initially dismissed Louis's behavior as a passing phase, a temporary blip on the radar of childhood development. After all, every child has their moments of moodiness, their periods of introversion, but as the weeks turned into months and Louis's condition continued to deteriorate, the reality became impossible to ignore. The palace, that formidable fortress of secrets, began to buzz with hushed whispers and anxious glances. Senior aides, accustomed to managing crises with practiced efficiency, found themselves grappling with a situation far more delicate, far more personal than anything they had encountered before. This wasn't a scandal to be buried, a controversy to be spun. This was a child in pain, and the weight of his suffering threatened to bring the entire house down. The first instinct, as always, was to protect, to shield Louis from the prying eyes of the media, to maintain the illusion of normalcy, to reassure the public that everything was under control. But William and Catherine, despite their deep-seated respect for tradition, knew that this time the old playbook simply wouldn't do. The silent, the carefully constructed facade had become a prison, trapping their son in a cycle of isolation and despair. And so, in a move that sent shockwaves through the royal establishment, they made a decision that would forever alter the course of their family's history. They chose to speak. Not through carefully crafted press releases or anonymous briefings, but directly, honestly, and with a vulnerability that was as unexpected as it was disarming. The statement, when it finally arrived, was a masterclass in understatement. Calm, measured, and devoid of the usual platitudes, it confirmed the tragic news that Prince Louis was facing a serious emotional struggle. There were no promises of a quick recovery, no timelines for his return to public life, no optimistic assurances that everything would be all right. Just a simple, heartbreaking acknowledgement that their son was in pain and that they were doing everything in their power to help him. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Disbelief, grief, and a profound sense of unease swept through the public consciousness. The carefully constructed image of the perfect royal family had been shattered, replaced by a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the struggles that lie beneath the surface. The media, caught off guard by the statement's stark honesty, scrambled to make sense of the situation, poring over every word, every nuance, searching for clues to the true extent of Louis's suffering. But the palace, for once, remained tight-lipped, refusing to offer any further details, leaving the public to grapple with the unsettling truth that even in the most privileged of circumstances, tragedy can strike. The stage was set for a reckoning, a confrontation with the past, and a desperate search for a new path forward. The carefully chosen words, or rather the glaring omissions, in the initial statement ignited a firestorm of speculation. Royal Watch, seasoned in the art of deciphering palace code, knew that the absence of typical reassurances spoke volumes. Where were the phrases like responding well to treatment or expected to make a full recovery? Gone, vanished, replaced by a deafening silence that screamed louder than any explicit declaration. The media, initially stunned into silence, quickly recovered its footing. News anchors, their faces etched with concern, abandoned pre-planned segments to deliver breaking coverage. Royal correspondents, their Rolodexes spinning, frantically sought context, replaying the statement ad nauseum. dissecting each syllable for hidden meaning. But there was nothing to clarify. The palace, in its unprecedented honesty, had offered confirmation, not explanation, a truth, raw and unvarnished, left to hang in the air, begging for interpretation. Online, the reaction was a maelstrom of emotion. Some users, their hearts breaking for the young prince, urged restraint and compassion. Others, their minds racing with unanswered questions, demanded transparency. Why had there been no warning signs? Why this sudden revelation? Why, if there was still hope, would the palace speak in such somber tones? Rumors inevitably began to swirl, fueled by the vacuum of information. Yet, amidst the chaos, a surprising level of self-policing emerged. Many users, mindful of Louis's age and vulnerability, pushed back against exaggeration, calling for patience and responsibility. It wasn't misinformation running rampant, but uncertainty grasping for something solid to hold on to. Inside the palace, as the storm raged outside, damage control was in full swing. Aides, their faces pale with exhaustion, wrestled with the fallout from the statement, grappling with the realization that their carefully constructed narrative had crumbled. Every sentence, every word, every comma had been meticulously scrutinized, debated, and ultimately approved. Not because the facts were unclear, but because the weight of saying too much felt just as perilous as saying too little. The priorities, as always, were twofold: compassion for the young prince and his family, and the preservation of the institution, that unwavering symbol of continuity and stability. But these priorities, once harmonious, were now locked in a bitter conflict. The objective was clear: slow the momentum, not stop it. Palace strategists understood that speculation was unavoidable. The goal was to limit the escalation, to prevent the narrative from spiraling out of control, hence the brevity of the statement, the avoidance of medical jargon, the absence of a designated spokesperson. Silence, they hoped, would act as a buffer, a shield against the onslaught of public scrutiny. But silence, as they were soon to discover, has a way of backfire. Within newsrooms, the lack of follow-up guidance was interpreted as hesitation, as a sign that the palace was hiding something. Inside the palace, it was strategy. Staff were instructed to hold the line, to offer no background briefings, no anonymous clarifications, no off-the-record reassurances. Even veteran correspondents, accustomed to receiving quiet nudges and winks, were left in the dark. Tension mounted as reports filtered in from the outside world. Media coverage was intensifying, not calming. Social media was filling the void with speculation and conjecture. And within the palace walls, a troubling realization began to dawn. The statement, while confirming the truth, had failed to anchor it. Without reassurance, the narrative was adrift, tossed about on the turbulent seas of public opinion. Emergency meetings, tense and fraught with unspoken accusations, became the norm. How much truth was too much? At what point did protecting Louis transition into enabling his suffering? Advisors clashed, their loyalties divided between the institution they served and the family at its heart. Some argued that further clarification would humanize the situation, drawing a much-needed wave of public sympathy. Others warned that any additional detail, no matter how innocuous, could be twisted, misinterpreted, and weaponized against the monarchy. Complicating matters was the timeline. This wasn't a sudden, unexpected crisis. Insiders knew that Louis' struggles had been brewing for months, perhaps even years, long before the public had caught on. That meant there was a history to contend with, a collection of past appearances, fleeting moments, and seemingly insignificant interactions that were now being re-examined under a harsh, unforgiving light. Damage control wasn't just about managing the present, it was about retroactively reframing the past. Even palace staff, those loyal foot soldiers who had dedicated their lives to the crown, weren't fully immune to the shock. Some reportedly learned the full scope of the situation only hours before the official statement was released. Their reaction was genuine, a mixture of disbelief, concern, and a dawning realization that the institution they revered was facing a crisis unlike any they had ever encountered. This wasn't a rehearsed operation, a carefully choreographed dance of public relations. It was a system reacting under immense pressure, desperately trying to recalibrate without precedent. The usual tools of royal management routine, hierarchy, distance, felt woefully inadequate. This wasn't a scandal to be outweighed, a controversy to be redirected. It was a deeply personal family crisis unfolding within an institution that thrived on predictability. And for the first time in a long while, predictability was a luxury they could no longer afford. By the end of that first day, one thing was painfully clear within the palace wall: control was slipping away. The statement had achieved its primary objective, confirming the truth, but it had also exposed the fragility of the monarchy's carefully constructed facade. Every subsequent step carried immense risk. Every moment of silence invited a fresh wave of speculation. And as advisors debated what could be said versus what should be protected, the palace found itself in an unfamiliar position, reacting, not leading. Then came the moment that no protocol, no carefully crafted strategy could have anticipated. Prince William, the future king, the embodiment of royal duty, broke rank. He abandoned the script, ignored the counsel of his advisors, and spoke not as a monarch in waiting, but as a father. The carefully constructed dam of royal reserve finally cracked, unleashing a torrent of raw emotion that stunned the world. He admitted his own failing, his own blindness, his own regret. "I should have seen it sooner," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. In that single, devastating sentence, decades of royal insulation crumbled. He spoke of the subtle signs he had missed, the quiet withdrawal, the loss of laughter, the shadow of sadness that had gradually enveloped his youngest son. He spoke of the guilt that gnawed at him, the sleepless nights spent replaying moments he wished he could relive differently. And then he revealed the question that had shattered his denial, the question that had forced him to confront the painful truth of Louis's suffering. Do I have to smile when I don't feel it? In that moment, the world saw not a prince, but a father, wrestling with the realization that he had failed to protect his child. The carefully constructed image of the perfect royal family lay in tatters, replaced by a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the struggles that lie beneath the surface. The silence had been broken, the truth had been spoken, and the monarchy would never be the same.